Hi, everybody. My name's Dan Wells, and I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. Today, I want to talk about a game that is very near and dear to my heart because I've actually written for it. Iron Kingdoms is the RPG based on the War Machine and Hordes miniatures games. And you know from all my Infinity videos that I absolutely love some RPGs that are based on miniatures games. Not all of them, but these in particular are fantastic. I got into War Machine years and years ago, thanks to my friend Howard Taylor, and then an opportunity came up to actually write some fiction for the game. So check that out, The Butcher of Kardov. That's a novella that I wrote based on one of the characters in their game. And it's super cool. That's me, Dan Wells. Anyway, you can go buy that. And I don't think I get any money from it. But the company does, and we love the company. So go buy it and read it because it's awesome. Anyway, War Machine actually started as a role-playing game. It was a licensed setting and new world using the SRD of 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. And they made their own role-playing game, and it was so successful and so popular because the world they created was so cool that they spun it off into a miniatures game. And then that miniatures game was so cool that they spun it off into a role-playing game, a brand new one using their own system. It still feels very D&D-ish, but they have some incredibly cool innovations, especially in character building and how characters are created, and they've got some new options. We'll talk about those in a minute. But first, let's show off my bona fides here. I mean, I don't know if I need to show more bona fides than I wrote one of their books, but I have 5, just off camera here, 5 War Machine armies on my shelves. This is my main one, my very favorite. Painted this myself. This is from the Retribution of Syrah. I am 100% a Retribution player, and that is the best. I also got to show off this little dude. Yay! He's an elf. He looks better than that camera angle makes him look. It's not a great... I don't know, he's kind of out of focus. Anyway, the first army I got into was actually Cygnar. In the lore, they're always red, but I wanted to paint mine kind of Soviet tank green. And then one of the armies I have is actually my brother's. He has a Protectorate of Menoth army. Anyway, what does all this stuff mean? I will tell you what all this stuff means. So the world of War Machine is the world of the Iron Kingdoms, is a kind of a World War I, World War II-ish industrial fantasy. It's not exactly steampunk, but you could call it that if you wanted to. Steampunk, gearpunk, magepunk. What it all boils down to is that an industrial revolution has taken place in a fantasy world, and now in addition to wizards and elves and dwarves and trolls and all of that kind of stuff, there are also big giant magic robots that stomp around, and it's really awesome. In the role-playing game, you usually play an adventurer rather than a soldier in the middle of the war. But the game is wide open enough, you know, and big enough, more than an inch thick, that you can kind of do any kind of story that you want. Let's talk about the world a little bit. This is our map. So here in the middle, this is kind of the in the miniatures game, Cygnar are the good guys, quote unquote, unless that makes you think they're boring. I always think the good guys are boring. But Cygnar is actually very cool. They're a very advanced nation. They're kind of going through this big wave of technological innovation, and so they have better big stompy magic robots than everybody else in some ways. At least they have more advanced ones and better technology to build them. Let's take a look at a picture. So Cygnar focuses on electricity and lightning, as you can see here. And they have a lot of neat things that they can do, but they're all about innovation and science and progress and kind of fighting for justice. So that's Cygnar. Next is Cygnar, and I showed you my little green Cygnar warjack. That's the same guy who back here is red. Not every kingdom in the Iron Kingdoms is analogous to an Earth one, but that said, Khador is very clearly inspired by a Soviet-era Russia, and it's really cool. And they all have, they rely less on innovation. They don't have really advanced warjacks. That's the name of the robots. But what they do have is the ability to just absolutely pile armor onto those warjacks so that they become unkillable behemoths. So they've got bigger warjacks than everybody else, and then their magic is based on cold and ice and snow, and they've got a nice blend of, kind of Soviet thousands of troops idea, but also, kind of old Russia, Cossacks, woodsmen in the forest. Baba Yaga is like literally a character in the war game that you can play. Khador is really neat. The book that I wrote was based on a Khador character, and I love them. And Khador, let's take a look at the map again. They're up here in the north. They're also enormous, but most of this is kind of like untrammeled wilderness. This is where like the manhunters live, the woodsmen and so on like that. All right, next we're going to take a look at this kingdom down here, the Protectorate of Menoth. They're kind of sort of bad guys. They're the ones that I showed you my brother painted. His are black and red and gold. Typically, they are done in kind of a white and purple. They are a religious nation. Menoth is one of the ancient gods, kind of the first god to arrive in this land called Immorin. And today, very few people worship Menoth anymore, except this kingdom of zealots, and they want everybody to worship him. And so they've got a lot of fire, and they've got a lot of kind of religious theme to their armor and to the things that they do. They often show up in the role-playing game as bad guys, and in the miniatures game as bad guys pretty often too. Next, what are we going to take a look at? Crix. Okay, so Crix is over here. These are all these islands. They are full of pirates, and they are also full of undead. Crix is, you can't see this super great. I wasn't able to find a huge image for them. They are necromancers and pirates, and I don't know what more I have to tell you beyond necromancer pirates. There's actually an evil dragon who is corrupting all of them and is, driving them to go forth and conquer everybody and steal all of their souls. And they're also obviously bad guys, but they're really cool. Next up is Syrah. So the Iosans, elves are split into two groups, as they often are. There's kind of high elves and dark elves, right? And so let's take a look at our map. Ios here is where most of the elves live, and their gods are dying. And most of their gods are in fact dead or disappeared. And so the really, I was going to say the downside to that. There's lots of downsides to that. The main practical function of that is that a lot of the new elves being born do not have souls. And so these guys, they are super mad. They blame all of these humans for using magic wrong. And so they think that that's why their own gods are dying and why their children are being born without souls. So they have, the Retribution of Syrah is actually a specific group that's going out and hunting down mages and killing them. Mage hunters are super cool in the war game, and it's one of the classes you can play in the role-playing game. They are awesome. So hooray for them. The kind of dark elves, so to speak, are called the Nis, and they're really more accurately termed ice elves, I guess. They live up here in Khador and then up here above Khador, and they are, some of them are bad and some of them are good. There's no alignment of goodness or badness between the two kinds of elves. They just have different priorities. And then this kingdom right here is called Rule. This is dwarves. Do I have a good picture of dwarves to show you? There we go. There's some dwarves. So they are not as involved in the rest of the kingdoms. And in fact, I think this might be fan art, because I wasn't able to find a really fantastic big splash image of dwarves from the company. These two little kingdoms here, Ord and Lael, they are small and they're right in the middle of everything. And they're pretty unique. Lael is cool in that it is kind of a a France that is in the middle of a French Revolution, so to speak. And that was this picture that I accidentally clicked onto. That is Ashlyn, and she is one of the nobles who is fighting to keep Lael free. They are being beset on every side. Cygnar is trying to conquer them. They're in the middle of, a revolution from within in which people are killing the nobles, and she is one of the, few brave, proud ones who is trying to keep the nation going. And so she's pretty awesome. Ord, that other one that I showed you, again, there's not a really fantastic image of Ord. They don't have their own army, quote unquote, in the war game, but they do have a lot of mercenaries. They're in the middle of everything right here. They have a lot of pirates. They have a lot of mercenaries. They have kind of treaties with Cygnar and with Cygnar and with Lael so that nobody attacks them. But that said, they're kind of beset on every side in a similar way to Cygnar. But whereas Cygnar is kind of all united into a single purpose and everyone's doing their thing, Ord is not. Ord is a little more libertarian, I guess as you could say. They are kind of the default setting for games in the role-playing game because they have such an incredibly wide array of options that you can do. Anyway, that is the thing. That's the world of Immoren, and those are all the major kingdoms. There's a lot of other stuff out here. There's a lot of interesting things like up here. This is the Thornwood, which is where there's a lot of druids and werewolves and things like that. There's also one of the major races in the game is Trollkin. You can actually, they're a playable race, and they live kind of just all over. There's a lot of them in Cygnar, there's a lot of them over here, and Trollkin are pretty awesome. We'll take a look at them in a minute. Anyway, let's go back to a great big picture of me so that we can see this book. Now, character creation is one of the things that I love about this game because your options are so wide open. Okay? I don't have a PDF, so we're going to be flipping through the book here. But let me find... First thing you do when you're going to create a character is you choose the race. And the races are humans and dwarves. Dwarves. Then you have gobbers. Goblins are a playable race in the game. There's Iosans, the elves. Then we're going to get some Nis, the other kinds of elves. And then those are Ogrins. Ogres are playable races in the game, and they're enormous. And then there are Trollkin, okay? And they are the last of the playable races in this game. There's expansions and other things that add more races to it. So you pick those races, they will have specialties, they will have specific attributes, things. Ogrins are obviously bigger and stronger than everybody else, and so on. Then you pick, before you get to careers, which are classes, you pick an archetype. And I really like this because the archetypes are what we would kind of typically think of as a class, but with all of the flavor and fluffy stuff taken out. So there is gifted, which means magic user, intellectual, which is, an academic or a scholar, mighty, which is a fighter, and then there is skilled, which is someone who relies on skills like a thief or a rogue or a, that kind of thing. So you can see in those four archetypes that it's kind of, are you a spellcaster, are you a fighter, are you a rogue, all that kind of stuff is boiled down into these very broad categories. And then once you've chosen that category, then you choose a career. But here's the twist, and here's what I love about this game. You don't choose one career, you choose two, okay? And that gives you this combination of an archetype plus two careers. Mathematically, there is just an obscene quantity of, combinations that you can have as you throw these together. So, for example, let's say, the main spellcasting class in the game, career in the game, is called a warcaster. Warcasters are the ones who can control the warjacks and boss them around and use them for labor and for war and for things like that. Okay? So if you want to be a warcaster, you get to combine that with something else. Your warcaster will not be like anybody else's warcaster because maybe you are going to take warcaster as one career and then thief. Or maybe you're going to take warcaster and noble, or warcaster and soldier, or warcaster and what else a crazy thing have we got in here? Duelist, cutthroat, pirate, priest, rifleman, sorcerer, spy. And so you can combine all of those in different ways. Do you want to be a noble who is also a spy? Or do you want to be a spy who is also a bounty hunter? You know, there's so many different options, and the way that those then combine with the archetype. So let's say that you choose warcaster and thief, but then you want to be intellectual. So you are a magic user who's got all of these scholarly and academic background, and then for some reason also a thief. Like, that's going to play differently than any other warcaster that anybody else makes, or to be fair, any other thief that anybody else makes. And so this gives you just a really great variety and just this awesome ability to customize your character and really make it your own. So I love that about this. You know, the book goes on. It has a bunch of other rules. Like I said in the beginning, it kind of sort of plays like D&D. I don't want to get too deep into it. There are obviously differences from D&D, but if you know how to play Dungeons and Dragons, you will settle into this groove really quickly and easily. Imagine that you took a game, you took a role-playing game and translated it with Google Translate into a war game, and then translated it with Google Translate back into a role-playing game. What comes out the other end is more or less the same thing you put in, but kind of different and unique and weird, and that's what this is. So the rule set, anyway. What I do want to talk about before I am done are the spells and the warjacks. This game has a very different use of spells than a lot of other games do. You kind of pick them off a list, similar to, you know, Dungeons and Dragons or Palladium or something like that. But then they're much simpler in play, much, much simpler. And I like that streamlined feel to them. And then, of course, there are the warjacks. They're kind of the defining element of the war game. They don't have to be as big a part of your role-playing game, but they can be, and there are full rules in here for how to build them, how to customize them, how to use them in game. You know, when do they act in combat? How do you balance them so that you know, when your characters finally get amazing enough that somebody gives them a warjack, or they're able to buy a warjack, or how does that not completely unbalance everything? How can you throw enough at them that they feel good about themselves because they have a warjack now, but also they can't just automatically win every fight? And there's a lot of different gear that the warjacks can have. You know, some of them have hands, some of them have their hands replaced with weapons or shields. Some of them have both, and there's a lot of magic options for the warjacks as well, like arc nodes, which is a way to cast your spells from the warjack rather than from yourself, which can extend your range, or it can, you know, do some fun tricks with corners and stuff like that. The combat system is obviously based on a war game, and, you know, down to the point where movement is counted in inches rather than in feet or yards or anything like that. That said, I have played this as theater of the mind. You can do it and are encouraged to do it with minis and terrain and stuff, but it 100% works just great. Theater of the mind, make it up as you go, imagine everything in your head, and all of the rules still work, and it does not demand miniatures if you don't like miniatures. But if you do, there's an enormous range of them, and they're pretty awesome because I own 5 armies of them. So anyway, Iron Kingdoms, I hope you understand by now that I love it. I think it is a really cool world, and they have wrapped a really neat game system around it, and it's an experience that you can't really get anywhere else. So if you like adventure and questing and war and big stompy magic robots who do neat things, then I think Iron Kingdoms is a game for you. We're going to be looking down the line at some of the other books in the series. Later in the year, we're going to get to, I mean, most prominently is Unleashed, which is the companion game, kind of a, not an expansion so much as a second game, but instead of based on the civilized kingdom, it's based on all of the wilderness people, like those werewolves and druids that I mentioned in the forest. So that's when we're going to get into all of them. It is a fantastic book that really helps round out the setting and give you even more neat options. Anyway, Iron Kingdoms, check it out. And War Machine is great. Privateer Press is great. So give it a shot, and I think you'll love it. Anyway, thanks for watching my review today. I hope that you had a good time, and I hope that I will see you again on my next review. Bye.